Hey everybody, this is Lauren Stein over here at Acctivate, and today we're going to cover advanced purchasing. Now, we're going to be sticking with the more complex purchasing concepts today under the assumption that everybody on this call knows how to create a PO manually, receive, and invoice it. So let's go ahead and dive right into the purchasing options. So to begin with, we'll talk about the ability to create bulk purchase orders via the Reorder wizard. This wizard takes into account the vendor list on the item as well as the warehouse order specifications. It gives you the ability to order your items in bulk without having to create a bunch of small POs throughout the day. So it gives you, a chance that you can create a bunch of sales orders and then maybe once or twice a day or every couple of days, take a look at the reorder wizard to go ahead and do those bulk purchase orders. Another concept we'll be covering is drop shipments. This is when your vendor ships an order directly to your customer. Your warehouse doesn't ever get involved in this process because there's nothing to be received. And then on the purchase order itself, it's seen as a non-inventoried item. So once you get shipment notification, you would go ahead and invoice that drop shipment PO. And then the last concept that we'll be covering today will be special orders. So this is for ordering items specific to a customer's order to be received into your warehouse and then turned around and shipped out to that customer that ordered it. In version 10.3, once the special order PO is received, the sales order is automatically scheduled. And if that item is lot or serial numbered, that lot or serial number that you receive is automatically allocated to that sales order, so you can go directly to that order and invoice it once you ship those items out of your warehouse. So for configuration on purchasing, we've got some options to choose from. The days to ship number in configuration management sets requested ship date on the PO itself. So this is the date you see in the header of the PO. It's in the same spot as the order date on sales orders, but it is considered the requested date because in purchasing, a lot of y'all use some kind of approval process, and so the date issued is the date related to the PO itself, since that's the date it's been approved and sent to the vendor for those of you who utilize multiple PO statuses. The statuses give you the option on restricting who can or cannot issue POs in conjunction with the user permissions. The status you choose in configuration management is the beginning status for your processes. Entered is the first status available, followed by request for quote, pending approval, and then issued. And the only status you can receive an invoice from is the issued status. So keep in mind when you're setting these default purchase order statuses, if you begin with entered, you'll have the full list of order statuses available to you on the purchase order window. If you start with request for quote, you won't have entered as an option, but you'll have the remaining statuses available like pending approval and issued. So this is the same throughout the list of statuses, so you'll need to set the default status to the very beginning of the process that you're going to be starting with. If you don't need to go through an approval process, you would just have the default status to be issued and then just not worry about the other purchase order statuses. The system admin can also specify a default PO warehouse. This comes in handy when you utilize a receiving bay or order raw materials which are used in an assembly process to be completed into a finished good warehouse. It's also a great way to set the default whenever you utilize one warehouse in Acctivate, so that way the users won't have to select it each time they create a new PO. It'll just default to that main warehouse and they won't have to worry about it. If you have multiple warehouses that are in different physical locations, you may want to leave this blank so the users have to choose which location they're ordering for themselves. Whichever warehouse is listed on the PO will be the one that's used on the receipt transaction. For those of you who don't know vendor pricing or set it yourselves, you can choose the option to use management costs as the purchase price. This will be used regardless of historical purchases with your vendor and is not used for drop shipment pricing. When not checking this option, the PO price is based on the vendor price specified. If there is no vendor price, it'll be the last PO price. If you haven't created a PO for that vendor or you've received only for that vendor, it'll be their last receipt price. If none of those exist, it'll be zero. Another option is the ability to receive POs in full. With this checked, all outstanding items listed on the PO will pull into a receipt session The user can override the received quantity or remove the items not being received as needed. If you're a company who receives partial shipments all the time, or maybe just 1 or 2 items from a bulk purchase order that you've created, it may be wise to uncheck this option, so that way they're not having to spend time deleting rows that aren't actually being received. And then the receipt window, if you don't have this option checked and you're adding items to the receipt window manually related to the PO, you're only going to see the list of items listed on that purchase order when you look up items on the receipt session. An option outside of purchasing is the ability to schedule dropship items on a sales order. You'll find this in the sales order options section of configuration management. Check this based on your specific needs. I've got a mix of customers that choose to have this option checked or unchecked. It really just depends on, do you want to have an approval process for drop shipments, or do you want to go ahead and automatically schedule dropship items under the assumption that it'll be shipped from the vendor? Take into account whether your process is to invoice immediately or wait for the vendor to notify of shipment to the customer as well, so that if you don't have it checked and you like to wait for that vendor notification of shipment, then that'll give you the opportunity to only schedule and invoice the sales order once that shipment notification is received. So the reorder wizard itself has a few filters available to the user. When utilizing multiple warehouses, you can filter on a specific warehouse or any warehouse. You can also group by vendor and hide assemblies from the wizard. So in version 10.3, we broke out the creation of assemblies into its own tab on the alerts window, but some customers may prefer using this reorder wizard as a starting point. You can also feel free to hide those assemblies from view. We're still giving you that option. When you click the reorder button, you can select all, save selections, and print a proof of what's been selected. The proof shows not only what's selected, but also the suggested quantity, purchase order quantity, current inventory levels, and the associated prices for each of those selections. This report can be printed based on the items themselves or grouped by vendor to give you a good overview of what you'll be ordering. By default, the preferred vendor is selected for each item. If no preferred vendor exists, but there are historical purchases in Acctivate, the user will need to select the vendor from a list. There'll be a drop-down on the supplier ID. You'll only see vendors you've purchased them from previously, so if you don't have any historical purchases or manually added vendor records on the item itself, you won't be able to select one in the wizard, so you would need to go back to the product, add a vendor, and then refresh the reorder wizard to see that new selection availability. The Create POs button will create one PO per vendor per warehouse for the items selected. This makes the purchasing process a lot smoother, especially if you're utilizing the minimum and maximum quantity fields on the product window. So this takes us to the next slide, which potentially could be a little bit confusing because we're going to talk about the suggested quantities shown on the reorder wizard. Also, just a side note, the reorder wizard itself is available for all of our customers. You don't have to purchase any additional modules to have access to it, but the dropship and special order wizards are a part of an additional module. But this webinar today will give you a demonstration that if you don't already have the dropship special order modules, and you do have scenarios where your vendor ships directly to your customer, or you have special orders where you need the purchase order linked to the sales order, you'll be able to see how that flows during the demonstration. So moving on to suggested quantity. The reorder wizard suggests quantities based on a calculation of net available. Now these quantities are not stored in the Acctivate database, but they are calculated at the time that you open that reorder wizard or refresh it. The net available quantity is calculated per warehouse by removing reserved quantity, the sales order quantities, and assembly quantities from your on-hand number and adding what's already listed on purchase orders. So again, it's on-hand minus reserved minus sales order minus assembly plus whatever's listed on PO. The reserved quantity is referred to as safety stock. This is the quantity you always want to have on hand in case a random customer comes in to order. They're able to walk out of the store with that product in hand. You can think of it as a buffer for those high demand items. The quantity listed as the reserved quantity will remove that quantity from the availability at all times for that item, but it won't remove it from the on-hand quantity. So that way you can ensure that, if that random customer comes into your store, you have enough stock for them to leave with it in their hands. The quantity listed on assemblies is based on raw materials listed in created and saved assembly sessions. Also, if you don't hide assemblies from the reorder wizard, the final goods listed on any assembly session are included in that on PO amount for the net available calculation. So this comes in handy for those of you who not only can manufacture in-house, but you can also order a completed product. If you're wanting to take that into account, then uncheck that option, and anything listed on an assembly session to be manufactured in-house would be calculated in that net available as well. The net available quantity is then compared to the minimum stock quantity or the reorder point for the warehouse. This item is not recommended for reorder if the net available quantity is greater than the minimum stocking quantity. Otherwise, we continue to the next check. So the suggested reorder quantity will restore inventory to the maximum stock quantity. Whenever you've set both the minimum and maximum stock quantity, keep in mind the maximum stock quantity is required when the minimum stock quantity is set. So this is translated as the maximum stock quantity minus the net available. And then finally, we check to see if there's a minimum reorder quantity on the product warehouse record. We will use that quantity if it is higher than the computed reorder quantity. So if the suggested reorder quantity is less than the minimum reorder quantity, then the suggested reorder quantity equals the minimum reorder quantity. All right, and then we'll get into drop shipment versus special order. So these are the main differences between drop shipments and special order. For drop shipments, it's treated as a non-inventoried item, so there is no related receipt transaction. You can either immediately invoice the customer, or you can invoice the customer once you've got that shipment notification from your vendor. Special orders are treated as inventoried items, so there will be an associated inventory receipt session. For drop shipments, there is no warehouse because, again, your warehouse never touches drop shipments. It goes directly to your customer. And for special order, you can either create a special order warehouse to separate that stock in your inventory value, or you can keep it in your main stock. That's really up to your discretion. The demonstration we're doing today does have a default warehouse set for special orders, so we will be demonstrating that today. Okay, and then also drop shipments, again, they're direct ships to customer, and then special orders are considered cross-docked or, repacked. So you're having your vendor ship items directly to your warehouse to turn around and send out to the customer that ordered it. And those products related to the special order PO are, separated from your main inventory because they are specifically for that sales order. And then drop shipments, it'll be a one customer sales order, and then special order purchase orders could include multiple customer orders. Also, the customer information is shared on drop shipments. Obviously, your vendor needs to know where to ship it. So once you create a drop shipment PO, the ship to address will be your customer's ship to address. And for special order, the customer information stays private because you're shipping it in-house. For invoicing of drop shipments, the cost of goods sold is pulled from the purchase invoice. You will see it reflected on the sales invoice, but the entry itself is taken care of on the purchase side. And for special orders, it's treated just like an inventoried item. You'll receive it at a specific unit cost, and that unit cost will be used, depending on your cost method, it will be used on the sales invoice. And then for different control types like lot numbered or serial numbered, drop shipments will be numbered when invoiced only. So this includes if you're drop shipping an item that you consider lot or serialized as an inventoried item, but for some reason you're going to drop ship this specific order to your customer. That means that before you invoice your customer, you're going to have to specify the lot serial number that was shipped to the customer, and that'll be something that it's like a text field. Number when invoice makes that lot serial number on the sales order a text field. Special orders, if it's a lot serial number, you'll be able to select the received lot or serial number because, again, it is an inventoried item that's received into your warehouse. And another note on special orders, if you're on version 10.3 and you receive a lot serial number related to a special order, that order will not only automatically schedule the quantity you've received, but it will also allocate the lot or serial number record that you created to that specific order, so you can turn around and immediately invoice that customer once you've shipped it out of your warehouse. All right, so let's go ahead and get into Acctivate so you can see some of this in play. And before we get into the demonstration portion, let's take a look at the configuration management options that affect purchasing. So to do that, we go to File, Configuration Management. And we'll start out at sales order, order options, because we do have one option that affects this. And that option is the schedule dropship products. So what this means is that when you enter an order quantity that's for a dropship product, it will schedule the entire quantity ordered rather than back ordering that dropship item, because if you make it a dropship product, you don't have it in stock, so without this option checked, it would set it to back ordered. And that's where that approval process comes into play. So if you need to have some kind of approval from the sales order, that's how you would kind of manage that, is that you would know that if it's back ordered, that you're probably waiting on the shipment notification from the vendor for that dropshipped item. We're going to leave this checked for the demonstration purposes. Go ahead and save. And then the purchasing options themselves are in the purchasing section of configuration management. So the days to ship is where you set the default number of days it typically takes to approve and send a vendor your PO. This sets the requested ship date to the number of days to ship. If you don't use an approval process, you might want to set this to 0, so it defaults to today's date. So if you're starting out in an issued status and you're going ahead and sending it out today, and that's your normal process, go ahead and set that to 0. But if you do have an approval process that takes a few days, set that to the average number of days that it takes to get that PO requested and approved. Order status sets the beginning status for the new purchase orders. It goes in a specific order starting with entered. You'll go ahead and hit edit. Request for quote, pending approval, and then issued. And then like I was talking about earlier, if you start out as request for quote, you won't be able to select entered, but you'll be able to select pending approval and issued. And then the same goes for, if you start out at pending approval or if you start out at issued, you're not going to have the previous order statuses available to you. So if you do need to have those statuses available to you, start out at the first step in your process. If you want to set a default ship via and FOB, you can go ahead and set that in configuration management as well. These can be overridden on the individual POs. And then again, we have the default warehouse. So this goes back to, if you don't have multiple warehouses, go ahead and set this to your main warehouse. If you do have multiple warehouses, if there's a warehouse that you generally want to receive in the most, you can set that here, and that goes back to the raw material versus finished goods warehouses that a lot of our customers use. Typically, they're going to want to set, when they use that, they'll set it to raw materials because they're not going to be ordering their finished goods, they're going to be ordering the raw materials. The default terms is used if your vendor doesn't have a default term set in QuickBooks, and then also in the purchasing options section, we have this use management cost as purchase price. So this is the manually set management costs per warehouse would be used as the price instead of your vendor price set on the product window. And then we also have receive POs in full. The rest of these are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go over those in detail. All right, so now let's take a look at the reorder wizard. This is actually one of my favorite tools to talk about with my implementations. Once they get used to creating manual POs and getting familiar with the PO window itself, I'll direct them to streamline their purchasing process by utilizing this wizard. Some customers like to let their availability set the suggested quantities, and others prefer to set the warehouse ordering quantities on these items. So that's up to you, and that's where this suggested quantity comes into play over here. And then if we scroll over to the right, you can see available, on hand, suggested cost comes from the preferred vendor price. If you have a management cost specified, the minimum stock quantity, the maximum stock quantity, average cost, last cost, and whether or not it's an assembly. And then the available filters on this window are warehouse, vendor, group by vendor, and then also hiding assemblies. And before clicking reorder, let's take a look at this product A121. And you can do that by either double clicking on the product ID or clicking view product after you've highlighted the row. All right, I'm going to move this down a little bit and move this up a little bit because I want you to see how these are calculated. So we've got a suggested quantity of 481. And that's because we have on hand of 14, Minimum quantity of 25, so that means that it's going to show on the reorder wizard because our availability has gone below the minimum stock quantity of 25. We've got a max stock quantity of 500 and a minimum order quantity of 50. And then we've also got this listed on a PO with a quantity of 5. So that's where we get this suggested quantity of 481 because it's going to suggest that you order up to your maximum stock quantity. And if we add a reserve quantity, let's say 10, and save, notice that the available quantity goes down to 4. And if I refresh this, the suggested quantity is now 491. It has increased to cover because now your availability includes this reserve or safety stock. So for those of you that are worried that you've got customers that come in randomly and you've got some high demand items that are ordered all the time, you might want to set that reserved quantity to cover somebody coming in and wanting to, walk out of your warehouse with it that day. And then take note that these quantities are per warehouse. So we're working with the D warehouse right now, but if we click on the F warehouse, which it's not listed in the reorder wizard for the F warehouse, that's because we've got enough on hand to cover not only our minimum stock quantity, but we've also got enough for the maximum stock quantity. And nothing's listed on sales orders, so our availability matches our on-hand quantity. Now, if you're ordering across multiple warehouses, make sure to look at all quantities by sorting on maybe something like product ID. And to sort, you just click on the header. I've already got it sorted on product ID, but you can see we've got multiple warehouses listed here. So when you've got, virtual warehouses, you may take into consideration that you might have enough stock in one warehouse to cover the need in another. And then the suggested quantities are a total per warehouse. So this would give you an idea if you are using the virtual warehouse scenario on maybe you don't need to reorder, but you need to transfer. And you could actually right-click on this grid and send to Excel if you wanted to use this to create an inventory transfer session. And I did have a couple of questions come in before the webinar, and for those customers that have variable demand throughout the year, these reorder points on the warehouse like we see here on A121, those would need to be modified on a seasonal basis or whatever makes sense for your business to reflect your actual demand. So using a report like the inventory monthly demand report to calculate what these numbers should be would be a great starting point. If that report doesn't work for you, you can look through the list of reports that we have available in our standard report list to see if another one does, because the reports in Acctivate can be exported to Excel, reformatted if necessary, and could be used as an import to update these warehouse stocking quantities. And then also, for those of you that discontinue your items, when you're discontinuing items, make sure to remove the inventory management quantities from each warehouse. This way, you would only be prompted to purchase the item if you were to schedule more than what you have available on a new sales order. So that way, once you've sold out, you could mark that as inactive and it would remove it from this list completely. So if we open product F120, let's say we want to discontinue this item and we don't want it to show up on the reorder wizard anymore. So it is on the reorder wizard because it's only got a quantity of 2 on hand and our minimum stock quantity is 50. So what I would do is I would edit, check the discontinued box, and then zero out all of these warehouse inventory management quantities. When you hit save and then you refresh this window, F120 is no longer in the list because you have enough on hand to cover sending 2 of these out to your customer from the D warehouse. If you have multiple warehouses, you would just do that same process across all of your warehouses. And this will ensure that it won't show up unless a user has actually scheduled that product over what you currently have available for that discontinued stock. And then once again, if you have sold the full quantity on hand, then go ahead and mark that product as inactive, so that way it's a little bit harder for the users that are entering orders to select that product because it'll have a big X on the side when you're including inactive items in the lookup. Okay, so let's go back to the reorder wizard. So when you click reorder, that actually gives you more selections. You can now select products on the left-hand side, you can use this toggle to select all, save selections, print the inventory reorder proof by product or by supplier, and also create POs. All right, let's go ahead and group by vendor so you can see how this works. So you can see everything collapses based on the preferred vendor set on the items. If the product does not have a preferred vendor but does have history with the supplier, it will be in the blank section. And then you can see here, these don't have a preferred supplier, but if you click in the PO supplier, the drop down will show you vendors that you have previously purchased this product from. So we'll go ahead and select good stuff for this one. Coffee bag doesn't have a vendor record. Glass cleaner, we're gonna do Berkeley paper. Work table, we'll do that Berkeley paper as well. And then the F90-R, we're not going to order that one today. But we do want to order bag 1. And so what you would do is you would open that product. Add a vendor on the vendor tab. Now, if you do know what the vendor price would be, you can enter it here on the price. Just say $2 and save. All right, and then we close. We'll have to save the selections to refresh this window. So we'll go ahead and save the selections. Okay, and if we expand this again, you'll notice that the ones that we had specified a PO supplier have now moved into their respective supplier groups. And now we can choose Adams paper on the bag product. We'll hit save. And again, now we just have this F90R available here. All right, and then let's take a look at Berkeley paper. So you can see the ones that are selected already, those are the ones that we added vendors to. It's going to assume that if you're adding a vendor to this, that you're gonna wanna actually reorder it. And then you can select each item as needed. So let's say we wanna go ahead, maybe not all of them, we won't do the copy paper just yet. We're just going to order for the D warehouse. I'm not filtered on the D warehouse, so I can see all of them, but I want to just order for D. And then over here on the right hand side, you can actually update the PO quantity as well as the PO cost over here. And let's say you don't want to scroll all the way over to the right to see if you wanted to update the PO quantity. So what you can do is you can drag the available quantity over here and maybe on hand. And so that way you don't have to scroll over to see that. And it's saying to order 500. We're going to change this to 450. Maybe we want to modify that maximum stock quantity at some point. We're going to round this one out to be 500. And we're going to leave the other two alone. And we're also going to leave the PO cost alone over here because we're going to let it default to what the PO price was last time. All right, and then we're going to save selections. And then we can print the proof. So the inventory reorder proof itself, it shows you what you've selected and it's based on the products. It's not based on the vendors. And so you see, here I'll make this big. So you see the product IDs, description, the vendor that's been selected, the warehouse, the suggested quantity and cost for each of the items, the purchase order quantity and cost, so you can see if the user has modified that in any way, as well as the current inventory available on order and on-hand quantities. So let's close this, and then we're going to do the inventory reorder proof by supplier. So this groups it by supplier to give you an idea of what these purchase orders are going to look like. Close. All right, and then after you've taken a look at the proof, make sure everything is correct. Not everybody uses the proof, but if you do, that gives you the ability to do so. You can also see the PO totals here on the right-hand side. You go ahead and click Create POs. So this is going to create a PO per vendor per warehouse. And so we've got 3 POs being created. Do you want to continue? Hit yes. All right, so we've created 3 bulk purchase orders, and now you can see that automatically refresh to remove those items that have been ordered. So A121 is no longer in the list. All right, and then also another option, if you want to print all of the issued POs that haven't been printed in the past, you can do so by going to Purchasing, Print Issued Purchase Orders, and then you have all these options. Print newly issued purchase orders, or you can reprint based on all printed purchase orders, a specific issue date, or between a range of specific purchase order numbers. You would also specify the issued by user, and then you can say, I only want to do standard purchase orders. Click preview, okay, and this will be all the unprinted purchase orders. Now, the purchase orders that we have here are the ones that we just created, and this is only going to print issued purchase orders. And then you can, if all purchase order printed properly, you can go to finished. If not, you can enter the last purchase order number correctly printed and restart from there. Or if you want to abandon this printing, hit cancel, because what it does is it checks a box in the database that it's been printed. All right, so now on to dropship and special order. So I created sales order A1525T, and it's specifically for this demonstration. Now the items listed are inventoried, but we're going to toggle the line types on each row to be dropship and or special order. So we'll hit edit. We're going to change New York strip to be dropship. You can see that removes the warehouse and it automatically schedules the product because we have that option to schedule dropship items checked in Configuration Manager. And then we can change this to special order, and we get the prompt PC20 is not stocked in our warehouse FS, which is the Fort Worth special order warehouse. Do you want to add that warehouse to the product? I'm going to hit yes because Southwestern Industries likes to keep that inventory separate. So that changes the warehouse on this to be FS, and the quantity is still set to back ordered because we need to receive this from a PO for it to be scheduled. Now, for those of you that do utilize dropship special order, you can set products to be dropship or special order only. Keep in mind that if you do that, you're not going to be able to use them as a regular inventoried or non-inventoried item. So that's why I wanted to show you the toggling of the line types on the sales order, because the New York strip steak is an inventoried item to Southwestern Industries, but since we're changing the line type to D, it's going to be considered dropship specifically on the sales order, and it'll give us the ability to ship this directly to our customer. And the same goes for special order. You know, you can make a regular inventoried item special order. So let's say you've got this inventoried item that sometimes you do special orders for, but most of the time you like to keep stock. So if for those of you that have that, you know, maybe 75% of the orders are just regular inventoried orders, you would just set that item type of the item to be inventoried and then toggle as needed on the sales order. Now you do have the option of creating a dropship and special order PO from the sales order itself or using the wizard. So we'll go ahead and hit save. If you're doing it from the order itself, you use this create menu at the top, and then you would specify whether a dropship or special order PO. I honestly prefer using the wizard because that gives you the ability to potentially create bulk purchase orders for dropship and or special orders. So I'm not going to use this here, but you do just know that you do have the option on creating it specifically from the sales order. Okay, so we're going to do dropship first. So to get to the dropship wizard, you go to purchasing dropship wizard. You can also add this to your icon bar if you use it all the time. And that's through this little arrow on the right hand side, add or remove buttons, icon bar, and scroll down to dropship. And you can add that. You can also add special order. So now you can see it's easily accessible from the icon bar. So we'll do dropship. Now this wizard doesn't have a warehouse to be specified because again it's not going to be touching your warehouse. We've got multiple sales orders listing dropship lines. So once you're in the wizard, you hit edit to select specific items, and then also if you needed to modify the vendor records chosen by default. The vendors you see here are the preferred vendors listed on the product. Since they're also, you can see we've got 4 orders for the same customer, but 2 different vendors. So what's going to happen is if I select all, it's going to create 3 purchase orders. It's going to create one for the burgers and such customer from Good Stuff, one for the ABC customer from Berkeley Paper, and one for the ABC customer for Good Stuff. And now that's because it's going to the same ship to location from the same vendor. Now, let's say ABC has multiple ship to locations and each of these sales orders lists a different ship to location. If that was the case, then it would create a purchase order for each ship to location because it's going to be unique to the ship to location and the customer. So let's go ahead and select all. I'm going to leave the vendors here and the requested price, save, and then create POs. So as you can see, it does create 3 purchase orders because those Berkeley Paper items are all going to be going to the same ship to location. Okay, and if we go back to the order with this dropship line selected, now we have this View PO button. So you can click on that to open the related purchase order. If you're starting from the purchase order and you want to look up you can do so based on the sales order number. So when you've got this bold PO as your selection field, this is going to do the multi-field search, and so I can search for A1525T to open the specific purchase order related to that sales order. If I scroll over to the right, you can see that that's highlighting the sales order related. Okay, and again, receive can't do that from a dropship PO because your warehouse never touches it. And then once you could see this cost of goods sold, that's related to the product class assigned to the item. We're going to go ahead and click invoice, do this real quick, and then check the date. And then since this is treated as a non-inventoried item, you have to manually approve the quantity. And we're going to assume that the price has stayed the same that we requested it at. Create invoice. I'm going to mark the PO as complete. Now you don't have to invoice these products before you invoice your customer for dropship. It really is up to you. Again, do you want to have that approval process? Do you want to wait till you get the shipment notification from your vendor? How long does your vendor take? How long is the turnaround to get it to your customer? All of those things need to be taken into consideration. This item is number 1 invoiced. And we're going to do just 1 for the whole quantity of 5. Save, create invoice. And then now we're going to go ahead and set this to scheduled, and we're going to process the special order line. Again, you don't have to separate these out and invoice as each one is sent to your customer, but I wanted to show you that if you look at the invoice, the cost of goods sold amount matches what you invoiced from your vendor, that $275. So you will see it on the view invoice window, but the journal entry itself is done on the purchasing side. All right, so now for the special order, let's go ahead and open the special order wizard. And then we'll filter on the, this one you do have to select the warehouse you're doing this from because special orders are received. Do Fort Worth special order. I'm going to hit edit, select all, and then I'm going to do it from the same vendor, Berkeley Paper. Now you can see that when you click in the vendor record, there's a drop down and you can select from the list of vendors you've already purchased from, but you can also hit this lookup to select a specific vendor from the full vendor list. It really just depends on what your requirements are. The requested price will default based on past purchasing history or the specified vendor price. All right, we're going to create PO. 1 was successfully created because it's all going to our warehouse. And now when we go to view that PO, keep in mind that this scheduled quantity on the sales order is 0 still because we haven't received it. So when we go to receive this PO, PC20 is serialized. So I'm going to specify a serial number for each row, and then the received quantity is going to be 111 into this, this warehouse at this date. So when we post it, this is what's going to prompt the sales order to be scheduled, and that's those serial numbers selected. So now you can see the scheduled quantity is toggled to 2. and the serial numbers have been selected on the order. So now you can go ahead and complete this by creating the invoice. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. So I'm going to take a moment to go through some of the questions that we have, see if there's any that have been unanswered. Okay, so we've got a question here. Is there a way to set the reorder wizard to order in master carton quantity only? So that question would go back to, what do you have set as your purchasing unit? Because the purchasing unit is what's going to be used in the reorder wizard. So you could specify that either as a purchasing unit or also on the vendor record itself. So you would set the purchasing unit to be whatever that quantity is that you're ordering from your vendor. And then save, and that's what's going to be reflected on the reorder wizard. Okay, and then we do have another question on, if it's a special order, can you set it to advise other users like sales reps of changes in the PO status, promise date updated or receiving or anything like that? The purchase order window itself, you could use the notes to notify, but it's not going to automatically send a notification. But if you click on this notes field, you can add a new note, set the follow-up user, follow-up date and time, and then tell them what they need to follow up on, or just let them know it's been received. I'm going to set this to myself, save and close. And now if you go to alerts, which they can have this open, you'll see this has been received in full. And then if you click on this link at the bottom, it will open the related document, so you can go and verify what's going on. Okay, that looks like all the questions that we have. So as always, if you have any questions, feel free to search our help site. That's help.acctivate.com. We are continually adding content to the help site. If you don't see something that you need, create a support request, which is also done via our help site. And a support team member will get back with you, and if you let them know that, hey, this would be a good help article, most likely they're probably already taking note that it's not there on the help site, so they're going to go ahead and add it. But you can also tell them that it's not there and then have them explain to you how to do whatever process you're trying to do. For those of you that want to get on version 10.3, you can go to our downloads page. So I'm going to show the help site here. Go to the downloads page. And then right now our downloads, we haven't released 10.3 to everybody, but we are doing some final testing to get to that point. So what you do is in the URL, add preview, hit enter, and then this gives you the ability to download 10.3 on your server, and go ahead and start utilizing the new functionality, like the ability to create assembly sessions from the assemblies alerts tab, as well as from sales orders. And as always, we do appreciate you spending some time with us, taking time out of your day to take a look at some of these in-depth subjects. I hope you got a lot of good information out of this, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. Have a good day.